This is Joe Pearson, the project planner for this application. This is a request for an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision to approve a special use permit to allow for the development of a hotel project located at 180 West Esplanade Drive. This appeal application was filed by the owner and operator of the adjacent Gold's Gym. The special use permit would allow for the construction of a new hotel on an existing 9,120 square foot pad in the Food for Less shopping center. The proposed hotel would be a 41,422 square foot hotel with 88 rooms. The hotel building would be 5 stories with a maximum height of 70 feet. The project would also include 2,267 square feet of landscaped area and the required 88 parking spaces provided through a shared parking agreement for the shopping center, which has a combined parking count of 632 parking stalls. 2 modifications are also being requested with the approval of the special use permit. The first is to allow for the building to exceed 2 stories or 35 feet, and the second is to grant an administrative parking relief to allow for a decrease in the number of required parking spaces for the overall shopping center. The project site is located at 180 West Esplanade Drive in the center of the existing 14.5 acre Food for Less shopping center in the city of Oxnard. As shown in the slide, these images provide additional views of the project site from within the shopping center and adjacent streets. The images also show the surrounding development within and adjacent to the project site. As shown, the surrounding development is mixed with various building heights and designs, including high-rise development and a regional shopping center. Additionally, many of the buildings are more modern or contemporary in design. As noted, the project site is within the shopping center and is bounded on the north by the parking area for the Food for Less and the Food for Less store beyond that, West Esplanade Drive to the east, Gold's Gym and parking area to the south, and a parking area and commercial loading docks to the west. As shown, the overall shopping center is surrounded by commercial uses, with the Esplanade Shopping Center to the north, the Railroad and former Levitt's building to the west, the financial towers and office to the east, and another commercial center to the south. The general plan land use designation is commercial general, and the zoning designation is general commercial. A hotel is allowed in the C2 zone pursuant to Oxnard City Code, which allows for all related uses permitted in the commercial office zone, which allows for hotels to be permitted in the C2 zone, subject to approval of a special use permit. The original center was first entitled in 1963, and more recently, in 2012, City Council approved a special use permit or planned development permit for the redevelopment of the shopping center. The approval allowed for the development of a new big box retail building, new gas station, and 2 new retail buildings, as well as the rehabilitation of 2 existing retail buildings. To date, the site has been developed with the exception of 2 new retail building pads which remain vacant. The proposed project will be located on the vacant building pad intended for the 9,120 square foot retail building. As shown in the site plan, the project will be located in the existing center. As most of the site improvements were completed with the redevelopment of the shopping center, minimal site improvements are required as shown. Most of the improvements will be located in the back of the building where 8 parking spaces are being removed to allow for the hotel pool and outdoor amenity area, as well as the expansion of a trash enclosure. Access to the site will continue to be provided off of Esplanade Drive. As previously mentioned, the proposed building will be 5 stories with a contemporary design. The building will have a peak height of approximately 70 feet at the elevator tower and 60 feet at the top of the parapet. On February 18th, 2021, the Planning Commission held a public hearing to consider the approval of a special use permit to allow for the development of the True Hilton project. Based on the analysis provided in the Planning Commission staff report, staff recommended approval of the project. At the hearing, the Planning Commission heard public testimony, deliberated, and made a motion to approve the project as they can make all the findings required to grant the special use permit. Following Planning Commission's approval, on March 8, 2021, the appellant filed a timely appeal application with the city. The appellant's first point of appeal was that the project was not consistent with the previous approvals for the site and that a new mitigated negative declaration should have been prepared because a hotel was not anticipated. This is incorrect. As noted in the staff report, the Food for Less redevelopment project did not limit or prohibit any uses within the shopping center. As only the gas station and Food for Less were identified and proposed at the time of the development, all other future uses were to be allowed based on the uses allowed in the C2 zone. This includes both the current gym use and the proposed hotel. Also, as detailed in the staff report, the state CEQA guidelines allow for the preparation of an addendum to a previous environmental document subject to the provided state guidelines. The appellant failed to identify, pursuant to the applicable state CEQA guidelines, why a subsequent environmental document should have been prepared. As a result, staff still find that based on the state CEQA guidelines, an addendum is the appropriate environmental document. As detailed in Attachment E of the Planning Commission staff report attached to the council staff report, the project is consistent with the policies of the 2030 general plan. The project is an infill development located along 2 commercial corridors. The project will also further the redevelopment efforts of the Food for Less shopping center, which began in 2012 with the approval of the planned development permit. The project will also be located on one of 2 remaining building pads originally approved under that planned development permit. Additionally, the shopping center has a shared parking agreement, which allows for the provision of parking based on demand as opposed to strict standards. This allows for the most efficient use of commercial land and the adequate provision of parking. As previously noted, the hotel is allowed in the C2 zone pursuant to Oxnard City Code, which allows for all related uses permitted in the commercial office zone, which again allows for hotels to be permitted in the C2 zone subject to approval of a special use permit. As shown in the attached Planning Commission staff report, the project is consistent with the standards of the C2 zone with the approval of 2 modifications. The first modification is to allow for the building height to exceed 2 stories or 35 feet, which again can be approved by the Planning Commission subject to approval of a special use permit. And the second is to reduce the amount of required parking for the overall shopping center. The previous redevelopment associated with the Food for Less shopping center was analyzed through a mitigated negative declaration. Potential environmental impacts associated with the project were identified throughout the MND along with applicable mitigation measures. The MND identified potentially significant impacts which could be reduced to less than significant impacts with mitigation incorporated in the areas of air quality, cultural resources, geology and soils, and noise. No significant and unavoidable impacts were identified in the MND. Generally, an addendum is an amendment to a previously certified environmental document. Pursuant to CEQA guidelines, an addendum to a negative declaration is the appropriate environmental document in instances when only minor technical changes or additions are necessary, or none of the conditions described in Section 15.162 calling for the preparation of a subsequent EIR or negative declaration have occurred. An addendum can be prepared unless there are new significant impacts, or there are new mitigation measures that can be implemented and the applicant refuses to accept them. The addendum reviews the proposed True Hilton project in relation to the 2012 M&D and current baseline environmental conditions based on the city's initial study checklist. The analysis accounted for the changes between the original project, which included approximately 9,120 square feet of commercial space, and the proposed 41,422 square foot hotel. Given that the site is already mostly developed, the scope of the development's construction impacts were limited to the existing building pad and its immediate surroundings. While there were some increase in construction-related impacts due to the larger building, as identified in the addendum, the changes did not result in any new significant impacts based on the city CEQA thresholds and state guidelines. Additionally, many of the impacts related to the operation of the proposed project were reduced, such as impacts related to traffic based on the new VMT analysis. While larger, the proposed True Hilton project would not result in a development footprint beyond what was analyzed in the 2012 M&D and would be subject to applicable federal, state, and local regulatory measures. Accordingly, for all issue areas, the addendum concludes that the modified project would not result in any new or substantially more severe impacts than those identified in the 2012 M&D. The addendum also concludes that none of the conditions that trigger the need to prepare a subsequent environmental impact report or negative declaration would occur. The addendum also expands upon the analysis in the 2012 M&D for several issue areas based on recent legislative updates. These include aesthetics and urban design, air quality, climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, and transportation and circulation. Additionally, all previously identified mitigation measures from the 2012 M&D have been incorporated into the project conditions of approval. The Planning Commission determined that on the basis of substantial evidence and in light of the whole record, none of the triggers included in Section 15-162 of the state CEQA guidelines required the preparation of a subsequent EIR or negative declaration, and sufficient evidence was provided to justify utilization of an addendum pursuant to the relevant provisions of the state's CEQA guidelines, as implemented by the City of Oxnard. The appellant also objects to the True Hilton project because it included conditions of approval 98, 99, and 153, insomuch as these conditions should have been completed before Planning Commission's approval. The appellant's assertion that the hotel owner is solely responsible for approving the Transportation Demand Management Plan is incorrect. The city has final approval authority of the TDMP. The purpose of the TDMP is to proactively implement operational conditions to maintain and/or improve circulation and compatibility. Operational items can include things such as expedited check-in services, guest information provided prior to arrival, as well as a valet program. The TDMP does not require the approval of other businesses or property owners on site and would not affect their operation. The appellant's reference to their lease agreement is irrelevant as the city is not responsible for enforcing private lease agreements. The city processes applications in compliance with the Oxnard City Code and project conditions. The existing shopping center has an existing blanket shared parking and access requirement for the shopping center, which must remain in effect for the life of the project. Condition of approval number 153 is not a new requirement and was included only to reconfirm that the True Hilton project was still subject to the requirement for reciprocal access and parking. If the shopping center fails to maintain the required reciprocal access and parking for all properties and uses within the shopping center per the conditions of approval for the original Food for Less redevelopment project, the permit for the entire shopping center would be subject to revocation pursuant to Oxnard City Code Section 16-552. The appellant also attached their prior comment letter to the appeal, which generally raised two issues. First, this letter expressed concern with the project's inconsistency with the CC&Rs for the property. And second, the letter raised concern that the proposed hotel project and future uses would exacerbate parking problems on the site. As noted during the Planning Commission hearing, the city is not a party to the CC&Rs for this property, and thus they are a private agreement between property owners and are not enforced by the city. The city is responsible for enforcing conditions of approval on the project, and the CC&Rs cannot conflict with the conditions of approval or city ordinance. As such, the CC&Rs for the property currently contains a requirement to allow for reciprocal parking and access. The requirement to allow for reciprocal parking and access is required pursuant to the conditions of approval for the Food for Less Shopping Center redevelopment project and subsequent permits, including the Gold's Gym minor modification, both of which remain in effect. Therefore, as noted above, the requirement for reciprocal parking and access is an existing requirement that must remain in effect for all parcels covered by the entitlement, regardless of existing or future uses. Also, the city's traffic team independently reviewed the parking study, and they agreed with the determination that the off-street parking provided is sufficient to serve the anticipated demand of the project and surrounding shopping center. The parking study provided determined that the Food for Less grocery store never exceeded usage of more than 124 parking spaces during the peak demand time for the center of 6 to 7 p.m., while 337 spaces were required per the Oxnard City Code. The parking study found that the proposed hotel used required 88 parking spaces based on both the Oxnard City Code and industry standards, and that the proposed project provided the required 88 spaces. The parking study also found that the Gold's Gym utilized 297 parking spaces, exceeding the Oxnard City Code required 230 spaces by 67 parking spaces. However, when accounting for all of the uses on site, including the proposed hotel, excess Gold's Gym demand, and peak Food for Less demand, there would be an excess of 48 parking spaces on site. In the event it was believed that a public nuisance was being created due to the operational characteristics of the use on site, this would initiate a revocation hearing to determine the cause and could potentially modify conditions of approval or revoke a permit to cure the public nuisance. Based on the information provided in this presentation and associated staff report, staff recommends that City Council approve Addendum Number 1 to Final Mitigated Negative Declaration Number 12-01 and adopt the resolution denying the appeal and upholding the Planning Commission's approval, subject to certain findings and conditions provided in the resolution.